Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar with Kaylie and with Kaylie here. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us. And on this topic of pay transparency and this very actionable format of webinar, right? It's 30 minutes. It's going to be quite dense, very dense, in fact. But before we get into the dense part and the very actionable part, I'd like to introduce our main guest today first. Kaylie, say a bit more about Kaylie, about yourself and what you do there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Hi, I'm Kaylie. I am the Director of People at Checkly. Checkly is a software as a service, a monitoring tool developed for developers, very technical. And Checkly is a company fully remote, 35 people in 13 different countries. And I've been the people lead in remote first organization since about 2016. And most important is that these organizations or these companies have had a very, very big emphasis on transparency. So that is very relevant for this session. And then I am also a leadership and a remote consultant, mostly for startups. So I help them figure out their compensation strategy, mission, values, hiring, onboarding, all of the people foundations that a company would need.
So not only compensation, right? Compensation as part of a bigger thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
As it should be always, right? And for myself, so I'm Virgile, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Figures. We help out companies in manage their compensation using real-time data, but not only, and we're about to launch very soon our salary bands feature that allows companies to design their salary bands and salary ranges within Figures and share those internally and soon externally as well. And let's get started. Right? The main topic was transparency. And I think the transparency is not only applicable to compensation, right? It's much broader than that. And Kaylie, I'd love to understand how you view transparency at Checkly and some of the benefits you envision in moving towards a transparent model and a transparent compensation model.
Yeah. So we at Checkly, transparency is super important because we are a remote first company. We try to be as asynchronous as possible. So we don't have those moments where we walk into each other at the coffee machine or at a cigarette break and we kind of like just get information like that spontaneously from people. So transparency really helps us keep everybody aligned and manage expectations. And then if we move over to pay transparency, it kind of keeps us accountable as well, right? So pay transparency, for me, the benefit is not only that you avoid a discrimination lawsuit, but you decrease subjectivity or bias, inequalities in how employees are paid or how pay decisions are made. So when that pay information is openly shared, it reduces the likelihood of those pay inequalities or disparities and really helps to build trust between employees and employers, which segues us really well into the second benefit of pay transparency, which is higher employee engagement. So if people know how their pay decisions are made, they have a clear understanding of how pay is determined, they feel more valued and they feel more engaged in their work. They don't have to worry about like, am I being paid enough? Am I being paid more or less than somebody else in my team? Instead, they can focus on their actual work, right? They're also more likely to be motivated to perform better, knowing that their efforts will be rewarded and recognized. So actually last week, I was at a conference and the CMO of GitLab, she mentioned that employees who perceive their companies to be transparent versus the opposite are 12 times or have 12 times greater satisfaction. So I thought that was an interesting stat for sure. And then because we value trust, we value transparency, by being transparent about our pay, we try to attract people who value that trust and transparency as well.
So it's interesting. 2 points that I think are super interesting what you mentioned. One, your last point is something that I think is very true and very actionable, is that compensation and transparency as a discriminating value toward that you will attract people who are like-minded, right? It's always good when you think of your employee culture, I think, to think of the CSM element that will attract people that you ideally want to see in your company. And in fact, some people that are misaligned, some people are like, I disagree with pay transparency, won't apply, won't come. And that's a great thing because people that fundamentally are potentially misaligned with some of your core values. And second point that I absolutely love is transparency is key for accountability. And this is why I keep recommending companies, even those that don't want to be transparent, to act as if all their compensation decision will be transparent one day because it keeps them accountable, right? And I think accountability is super important.
Exactly.
One,
Yeah.
one point, Kaylie, though, and before I ask you that question, please, as Nick mentioned, any question you have, put those in the chat. Even though it's a short packed webinar, we try to take some questions along the way. Kaylie, one question for you. Weren't you afraid? Were there talks about like, is going to be transparent on pay? Will that hurt us? Initially, before you got into this journey, was there any discussion around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary, right? Also, there's different levels of transparency, right? There's like a level of buffer transparency, which they have all of the pays of the different team members online. You can check exactly how much the CEO makes and everything like that. So we actually had team members saying like, I don't want that out there because like I don't feel that's good for my just like safety. I don't want people in my neighborhood knowing exactly how much I make. So that was like a part of it. But then also exactly as you said, right? Like some people might not agree with how you approach transparency. There's some different models that we're going to go into later, but depending on how you do pay and how you have your pay strategies set up, people might not agree with it and people might leave, right? I think the big benefit for us was that we did it really early on. I think I started the project when we were maybe 15 people in the team and finished it. We were hiring quite a bit, finished it when we were around 22 people. So, you know, like if we had done it when we were maybe like 200 people or something like that, like probably people are going to disagree more and are going to leave the company. We didn't have anybody leaving though. We we managed it well. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a key point, right? I think most companies I know that wanted to move towards pay transparency later on in their life on the journey polled some of their employees. And in fact, I know personally two companies that decided not to go towards full transparency internally on pay because too many people were against and there were 40, 50, 60 employees companies and potentially it was too late, right? And you teased that doing some research. So I think it's time for the next part of our presentation, which is, oh no, the research comes later on. It's like you mentioned early on defining the goal of the project, right? And you mentioned forcing, making pay transparent, which we talked about, fair, okay, predictable and self-service, right? Transparent and fair, I get, and I think most people will get.
Yeah.
But what did you anticipate by predictable? What did you want there? And what did you want by self-service as well?
Yeah. So I think predictable and self-service is probably very close to each other. So self-service was more like, this is going to be like an extra nice to have. So we ended up with a calculator that somebody can go to in our team that they can say, I am a support engineer, I'm a senior, I live in this area, and like this is how much this is how much I'm gonna get paid. So with predictability and self-service, it's more like if I get a promotion, I can like, or I'm working towards a promotion, or I'm trying to get hired, I can see exactly how much I'm gonna get offered. And that's where the predictability and the self-service comes in. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So you align with the leadership team, everyone was aligned there. Or did you have to manage some misalignment, or were some people not okay where there's the other option, or was everyone pretty much aligned on those objectives early on?
So the good thing was that my CEO was fully aligned. He was like, let's do this, sounds great. And then I think with the rest of the leadership team, when we kind of introduced the project, like we value transparency highly. So it wasn't like a big discussion or anything, but we needed to align on like the actual goal, right? Like how transparent, what does fair mean to us? Do we want to do something self-service? Yeah, and I feel like if you're going to do a big project like this, you better align first, because otherwise you're going to put in a lot of time and effort, and then like you might be going the wrong direction, basically.
Super interesting. So then you finally mentioned research, right? And we won't necessarily go through all of the element of the research, but I think there's two interesting points there. The first point was on the methodology you mentioned, the different
Mhm.
type of methodology. Let's start with that, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned three different methodology, same pay for everyone, location-based according to local market, and what you called like formula-led pay.
Mhm.
I think the first two are quite logical and understandable. What was the third one that you considered by formula-led pay in terms of methodology you are seeing on the market?
Yeah, so formula-led pay is what companies like Buffer and GitLab are doing, right? They have like a formula, and pay or location is a factor in that. So you're not gonna you're benchmarking against one specific location, and you say like, okay, this is like our kind of like factor one when it comes to location, and then you kind of place other locations according to that. So for example, we benchmarked against London, and then we in that kind of same factor as London, we have other countries such as Belgium, Germany, Sweden. I think Spain is in there as well. And we say all of those, all of the employees in those countries, they all get the London pay. A higher cost of market is the USA, so they get a little bit more. And then lower cost of markets such as Ukraine, Turkey, Serbia, they have a factor 0.9. I might be getting too technical now, but like they get 10% less basically. But they're still getting more than if they were to be paid according to the local market. So it's like somewhere in between. San Francisco pay for everybody, and then local market.
Perfect. Then you walk through the article that we can share on like the 10 compensation principle, which is a great resource. We also have our own resource that potentially we can share on like how to define basically the compensation philosophy, right? Which is part of the elements you mentioned. How do we want to position ourselves internationally? How do we want to pay locally? Which part of the market do we want to target? All those kind of questions that's vital to determine before getting into salary structuring, salary model discussion. Then you went into benchmarking. So benchmarking, you want to look for, I think, local data to help you position yourself on the market, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we looked at different locations to see what would make sense for us as a company, looked at different platforms. And then also because I'm a one-person people team, we only benchmarked the actual roles that we had in the company or that we were hiring for. Because of course this is a big project and I had to save my own time a little bit as well.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then finally, after doing that, you came up with the formula, your own very much own Shakely formula for compensation, right? Can you walk us through quickly how this works?
Yeah, so this is actually just in a Google Sheet, so a spreadsheet, right? I would love to have it in an app eventually, but we haven't had the time to do that yet. So also, this is available to anybody also outside of Checkly. You can make a copy of it and it's yours. And it has all of the benchmark data in there. So in role, you say you're in support or a software engineer or in product management. Then you select your seniority. It can be junior, intermediate, senior, maybe your head of director. So that of course has an influence on your pay as well. Then there's a performance factor. So we added a performance factor, which I think GitLab Buffer didn't do. And that is just so that we have some flexibility for people to get pay increases when they're not ready to move up a seniority level, when they're not ready to go to senior or manager or something like that yet.
But it means that when you hire, everyone has a performance factor set at 1, and it's only in the company that you can progress?
Yeah, exactly. So actually our it's from 0.9, then 1, and then 1.1. So people by default start at 0.9.
Okay.
And then because they have to learn about the company and the values and everything like that, right? Yeah. And then the location. So as you can see, intermediate one, that would be UK, Germany, Belgium, as I said before. So you put all of that in and it spits out a number, and that's going to be your offer, or should be your pay if you're at Checkly already.
Okay. So and on the location, you chose the option of doing tiers, right? Tiers for intermediate location, high cost of living location, or lower cost of living location.
Exactly, yeah. It's in tiers because we didn't want the disparity to be too big. We had to like we have some tiers to make sure that we can pay our team, right? It's still affordable. But yeah, we try not to. I've seen other companies that have like 10, 15 tiers or something. I think we have 4 right now. So
And I think on that is a good moment to mention when of our long-time client, Gorgias, who I think has built a location-based model, a similar model to yours, in fact, very similar in terms of formula. I don't think they have performance in. And I think if you want to, like you, they outsourced their spreadsheet, the final spreadsheet. There's an article on spreadsheet. So what they did on location factor is gonna, I think, every time I look at this tab of the worksheet, I just faint out of complexity. I think they're mixing something like 8 to 9 different location factors that are all individual, that are separated for tech and non-tech.
Mhm.
I think it's an amazing piece of art. I personally love it. I've never seen anything as sophisticated as that.
Yeah.
It is quite complex, but I encourage anyone that wants to look at those type of models and want to see what the super high complexity sophistication type of model looks like, because there are like a 300 or 400 employees company, I think now 300.
Mhm.
It's a good example.
Yeah,
But
that's very cool. Yeah, we try to keep it as simple as possible because we are so small.
yeah,
And I'm the only one in the people team, so so we went for simplicity. Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Um, one more question is like, how often are you reviewing performance?
So we have 2 points in the year where we do
Okay.
reviews, and that's both updating the benchmarks that are into the pay calculator, and then also we ask all the managers to see like, okay, the seniority where people are at and their performance level, is that still correct? Does it need to be updated, and will a pay increase come with that? Yeah.
Um, Very clear. Then you design this model, you work, you research, you look at buffer, much like GitLab, you look at many model out there, align the company on the base principle of what you wanted to achieve from compensation philosophy perspective, design the model. Then I guess you're like, okay, final alignment. You presented, I guess, the result of your work.
Yeah, so we did a lot of it asynchronously. So I had a Slack channel with the co-founders, and just like as I was working on things, I was pushing it to them so they could check or add feedback if they wanted to. They could also add their opinion or their any concerns, was kind of worked on asynchronously. And then we had a final actual meeting, a synchronous meeting where we said like, okay, is this a go or a no go? It was a go. We did do it. And then any final questions, kind of like small things that needed to be fixed, and also the launch plan was figured out there as well. And then throughout the whole process, the entire team knew I was working on this, which helped with the rollout as well. And I had like a Notion page with like the different steps that I was going through, so people could always see where I was at. Yeah.
So in fact, it's interesting, right? Because we're gonna get to the launch part when you finalize its alignment to the leadership team and then shared it to the company. And I want to spend time on that because I think that's what scares most people ops
Mhm.
professional out there.
Yeah.
But was the team aware that this project was going on as you were working on it? The Notion page like was public?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay.
was that was really scary, right? I mean, just in general, having your work public when it's not ready yet is super scary, and people have strong opinions on pay, so extra scary. But people really appreciated just knowing that something was in the works, and that if they were interested, they could go have a look. And I was a little bit worried that I was gonna get just a lot of people like throwing in their opinion, but that didn't happen. Yeah,
Pretty cool. Then it didn't happen.
yeah,
And then you get to the end of it, validate it with leadership, asynchronously, synchronously. You get towards the end, and now it's time to finally launch it, right? And
exactly.
so walk us through the process of it's approved by leadership, your formula is approved by leadership, it's ready to be shared. What happened then?
Yeah. So then the next step was to share everything asynchronously within the team. So internally, we use Slack. So I did like an at channel message in our Slack that was like, hey, the pay calculator is finished. You can find the actual calculator here. Here's the documentation. And so we did it asynchronously so that people would have time to just like read through it and really understand all the parts of it on their own time. And then we said in 2 weeks, we're going to do a meeting that's going to be a Q&A. So, send your questions up front, ask your questions in the meeting, however you want to. And then that's exactly what we did. So we recorded that meeting, we documented all the questions and answers as well. And The rollout went very smooth actually with the team. There were a lot of questions, and I'm happy to share what type of questions we got as well.
But before you share on the question, how much time did you allow between the time you shared the document and the Q&A?
2 weeks. Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting because I would have thought it'd been like 1 or 2 days, but it was 2 weeks. And did you actually get question asynchronously in the meantime, or were people all tight-lipped and waiting for the Q&A to ask those?
Yeah, so actually we were planning on doing it 1 week first. I look back at the communication with the leadership team today. We were planning on doing it 1 week first, but then there was like some vacation going on. So a lot of people were out and it was like, okay, then we do it in 2 weeks. And then what we did was, I think I set up like a Google form or something. I was like, here, you can submit your questions already. And that's exactly what people did. So I think we had probably like 5, 6, 7 questions submitted asynchronously before. So we had like something to prepare for already. And then the rest of the questions were all asked during the meeting.
Okay, so pretty cool. So I think best-in-class formats, giving time people to review the documentation, and we're going to get to the Q&A and the actual questions, right? But
yeah,
work on the project. People know the project's happening, have the documentation, have the status of the project, out being shared the results, has time to think about the result asynchronously, ask question asynchronously for those who prefer actually to do this kind of format. And then you have the live session. And what happens in the live session? Do you go over the model, or you're like, okay, that's it, people. Those are the questions we've got asynchronously. I'm going to answer those and then take the synchronous question.
Yeah, so I gave a really quick intro that was just like kind of the timeline of the project. Here's like all the things that we did here. Like this is how much time it took. And then I made it very clear also upfront asynchronously that we weren't going to go through the entire model during the call. We were really going to focus on the Q&A. So like read it before we go into it, and then that worked really well. But I think also because it's a topic that people care about a lot, it doesn't always work.
Love the synchronous part, being like you have to do your homework and get ready, and we won't just use a meeting and use everyone time to go over the details. Just on the side, talking about question, if some of you have questions, please ask those questions in the chat. And then talking about questions, you get there. What are the 2 questions, type of question you got then?
Yeah, so we had some questions, especially around the performance factor and the location factor. I think everything else was pretty clear for people. So around the location factor, of course, it was like, why did we even add a location factor, right? People have strong feelings around everybody should be paid the same no matter where they live. So we talked a little bit about the reasoning behind it. And I think that's really important. There's no one size fits all regarding these different methodologies, and you have to really be able to say this fits for our team, our culture, and the stage of the company that we're at. And that's what we did as well. Also questions around like, okay, if I move to a different country that's in a different location factor, will my pay will decrease or increase as well? Which yes, that is the case. Then there was some questions around workations as well, like if I work from a different country for 3 months, will that impact my pay? And the answer was no.
So what's the threshold? 3 months is the threshold. Below 3 months, you don't have pay changes. Above 3 months, you do?
It depends on where you're officially registered. That's where your pay is based on. Yeah. And then with the performance factor, it was like if I underperform, does that mean my salary is going to decrease? We said no. It's we assume that it's always in a kind of like a it's always going to increase, and if there's underperformance, we're going to work with you to get you back to the level of where you need to be. That were most questions. And then also it was like, okay, we did this now for salary. Are we also going to do this for stock options?
Interesting.
And we did that as well. We don't have that public because there's a lot of sensitive information in there, but we have set up something similar for stock.
Super interesting. Okay, super interesting. And did any of the model change or any of the parameter change following the Q&A or following any question you received? Like, did that get you to reconsider some of the aspects of your model?
So nothing changed in the factors. There's like some smaller changes that happened later on because the pay calculator is about 1.5 years old now. So there's been like small iterations, but nothing in the factors. The only thing that we really reconsidered after the Q&A was some people brought up the concern of having, if somebody knows my role, where I work, can kind of guess my performance and knows my seniority, they're going to know how much money I have. And I don't want anybody to be able to look that up. So there were like a couple of roles that we actually took out of the public pay calculator
Okay.
because there were like one or two people who were very uncomfortable with it. And we were like, okay, well, we care about your privacy and your security. So let's just take those out. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And then you mentioned some of the next steps was like you gone internal, now time to go external, right? You mentioned open sourcing the model, blog post, putting it on job ads, right?
Yeah.
What I understand, of course, the logic behind it, and what was I think what was the impact of the outsourcing part and being fully transparent externally?
Yeah. So of course I got us some nice employer branding, right? Some people raved about us and were like, oh yeah, I wish my company would do this. So we've got some nice employer branding out of it, but also, and this was also something that came up during the Q&A was we really want to help other companies kind of like push the transparency and like feel a little bit more comfortable with being transparent. Like not only these big companies that are like, the thought leaders of transparency can do this, but smaller companies like us can do this as well. And also, we had one engineer who brought up a very specific example of we have a lot of, for example, software engineers that are coming to Berlin from Africa or whatever, and they're senior software engineers. They don't have an idea of what salary they can ask for. They get hired as a senior engineer, but paid as a junior engineer. So kind of just like the more data we can put out there to help people understand their value, the better as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it's a good moment to mention that once again, for those who don't know, new European pay directive or directive on pay, which is going to force every company in Europe within the next 3 years to start being transparent about salary ranges externally. So this is for sure going to change up and level up the playing field in terms of people knowing what they're worth, and it's going to change the dynamics of recruiting because I think many companies that use the opportunity of people not knowing their worth to potentially offer them junior salary when they were senior, I think is going to be progressively over, which I think is a good thing. Time is running out. I have one, potentially two questions for you. First question, Kaylie, if you can, and we have time to answer this. What would you do differently? Because looking from afar, I think it's a best-in-class process, right? You align your compensation model with your core value around transparency. You look for alignment in the leadership team, define your compensation philosophy, created the model, told the team you are creating the model, shared it with them, got them time to ask questions synchronously, asynchronously, answer those questions, outsource the model for full transparency and so on. Best in class process. What would you do differently?
That's a great question. And like I don't want to sound conceited, but I think I would do it exactly the same. I think like um it was well prepared. I brought like a product mindset kind of to the project. I really wanted to make sure who are my stakeholders, what is my goal, what is the scope, and it just worked out really, really well. Like we haven't had any fallout. Of course, we've had to make iterations, but I don't think that I could have foreseen those early on. I don't think I would do anything different.
Well, look, I'm not surprised. It doesn't seem like you're too arrogant saying so because from afar, it looks like a best in class process. Last question there's one question from Paul in the chat that we can answer potentially. You put support and people ops in your calculator. What do you put HR generalist? You put it in the support function or in the people ops category?
Yeah, so
For the
HR,
model.
yeah, HR generalists and at Checkly would go under people ops. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Our team is so small that we don't have like HR is people ops is people experience. So that's something that as we grow, we're probably are going to have to make the roles more specific. Right now, this is still working for us. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Pauline. Thanks for your answer, Kaylie. It's 3:30. We promised the short, actionable, informative webinar. I think we actually, I hope so. I'm biased, but I think we achieved this. I want to thank you, Kaylie, for coming in and sharing your experience, your best-in-class experience from my perspective. And I want to thank everyone for attending and those watching the replay, many, many more person. So thanks, Kaylie, for coming in. And everyone have a great end of the day and end of the week.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.